Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask. All right, welcome back. I'm excited today because I found something last night, and so I have a question, which is, what's next? What now? What do we do? I think we saw to come out recently in the proceedings of the Royal Society they found some evidence of giant sloth bones that were tooled and worked by people in Brazil 27,000 years ago. And so I think the peopling of America that we were taught
Yeah, the
is not
10,000-year-old ice bridge, and that's the only time that people came over here, and
yeah
they took forever to get into Central and South America, and is just wrong.
is wrong. And so I think that means, the idea of, the Mayans being way older than they actually are. Like, that those societies could have been built upon
Y-
much longer lines of time than we gave them.
Yeah, or at least the Olmecs, because we know a lot of people
That's
moved
what I
into
meant.
the yeah, and that's stupid, it's stupidly confusing too. Which is it is the Aztecs, the Mayans, and then there's the Olmec culture, which we don't know hardly anything about.
Right.
And as far as we know, they could have built all the stuff, and everybody else just moved into it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there's also throughout. I'm not going to get into all the weird details, but throughout Central and South America, there have been weird, random artifacts found that people were like, "Well, people weren't here, so they couldn't have done it," right?
Yeah.
But now we have, and the article I read was from the Smithsonian, polished and drilled sloth bones,
So
giant
yeah,
sloth
that
bones specifically.
that's what I've
Uh,
got pulled up here for you. This is one of them. And my first thought was, look how almost perfect that circle looks.
and that
Like
takes
it's
a lot of
it's
work.
it's really, and the next one is the one that actually blew me away. It was this one,
And
because if you look at, I went in too far. It's not that angle. Where is it? Is it this one?
yeah,
Yeah,
there we go.
look at that.
And
That looks like a tube drill.
I have actually done a little bit of work with bone, and making like knife handles and some of the bushcraft stuff and
Yeah.
things like that. And I wanted to see how hard it would be to take a modern leg bone of a deer
Yeah.
and turn it into like a bone knife. And I was using modern tools like a belt sander and
Hmm.
grinder wheels and steel made stuff, and it was very labor intensive and very difficult and very hard to do with power
Hmm.
electric equipment and modern steel. And it still didn't come out anywhere near as good as what this stuff is looking like. um, so working bone isn't easy, because it chips and it cracks, and for people who don't understand what goes into it, and I'm not sure if this would require it, but it probably would. Before I could even begin to work the bone, I had to soak the bone in water for like
Mm.
12 or 24 hours to make it pliable so it wouldn't shatter
Yeah.
because it's brittle, right? And
Man,
so
look at how clean
that's
that circle
amazing.
is, man.
Look at the polishing. Look at the
I know it's
gleam that you're.
reflecting light.
It's shiny polished
I
like a
mean, my
stone.
thought was, my first thought was, wow, that's amazing. And then I went, it's interesting. And then I immediately went to, oh, this was a badge of we killed a giant sloth. Because I was thinking, man, those things must have been hard to bring down because they were huge. So this one must have been like a hunter's badge of honor of, like, if you, like a big shark tooth or something, like it's a, we took this thing down.
And I want to give a little bit of perspective here because we're talking about human migration, which doesn't happen fast, right? Like
Hmm.
you don't cross the land bridge and then hoof it for Brazil nonstop, right?
Right.
However, the first adventurer to complete the Argentina Alaska trek by foot is a former British sailor named George Meighan, and he did it in 1977. Started it, and it took him 2,425 days to complete the
10 years?
30,608 kilometer multi-part journey.
Say how many days that was again?
2,425.
A little over 6.5 years.
And that was using the
Wow.
Pan American Highway, which is a
But he was just
paved
but he was
road.
just walking.
He walked it, but he also walked a cut paved road,
Uh, was he
which
walking a
speeds it up.
specific distance a day, or was he
It
just
doesn't
going as
say.
long as he
The
could?
blurb I
I'm just
have
curious.
it just says multi-part journey. So he
But
did
that's
not
a
do it all.
in
You know,
one.
it's like the people who do the Appalachian Trail, but they don't do it in one bit. They do a chunk and then they go back the next year and they do another chunk and then they go back the next year and they do
Yeah.
another chunk. Um, but when you think about that, we're talking 2,500 days to do it straight on a cut path. That is nothing compared to how long it would take to migrate down there.
Yeah. I
In
mean, you
large
might
peoples having to hunt
move.
for food and gather food and materials and stop for injuries and stop for people having babies and that's going to be a much slower. So they were there in Brazil 25,000 years ago. That means we got here a lot earlier than that.
All right, so
So
here's the next one. Oh, and so then the other thing that I wanted to that I also just came out this week, which I'll pull up here, which is from the US Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Land Management has new information on some stuff that was found in Oregon for 18,000-year-old occupation. So that's another new one. And then to go back again to this one, it was at the very end here in the final remarks. Here we go. So this is the paper Santana Elena, I guess, challenges the mainstream claims on the peopling of the America, and says that it was earlier than the last global maximum. It agrees with the evidence reported from other sites that has human presence in America, and then just calls out the list of all of them: the Bluefish Caves in Canada, White Sands in New Mexico, the Galt site in Texas that we've been
Texas, yeah,
talking about, the Mammoth in New Mexico, the caves in Mexico. It calls out some stuff in South America,
there's Chile.
and and they actually call out the Cerruti mastodon, which is the 130,000 year ago mastodon that
Which
just
makes that number
really
look.
blows the numbers way out the door.
But now that number looks a lot more realistic
Yes, it
because
does.
how long would it take us to go as a hunter gatherer tribe, assuming that that's what it is, from Alaska to Brazil? I mean,
Well, but see, my argument is now going to be that it needs to be flipped, and that we started at the bottom of South America and that we went north, because we've got that connection between Australia and those Aboriginal people of Australia and of Brazil being
just
linked.
that, and this brings up a question of mine is of just the people of the South Pacific in general. I mean, the trips made by the boats, and we're still not 100% sure how they did it. And then this again, I'm
Yeah.
going to go back to the Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit people who were on the island of Florence, and we don't know how they got
Hmm.
there because it was never attached to any kind of land bridge, as far as we know. They say it's always been an island. So I really think this is more like reading a fantasy novel is how we should look at this. There were hominids sailing around the oceans a lot earlier than we thought they were. getting to places a lot earlier than we thought they did.
Yeah,
And we know that like things as simple as reed boats made in Egypt can cross the Atlantic because they've done it.
they've
Whether
done
the
it.
people
Yeah,
who did it at the time actually did it or not, the boat could handle it.
right.
Um, and yeah,
And there's enough evidence. Just the DNA evidence alone between Australia and um
Asia.
I don't remember where it is, and it's in South America somewhere. I
Oh,
forget
okay.
exactly where. It's in the rainforest. It's in
As the
Brazil, I
Amazon
think.
basin,
Yeah, some
we'll
those
call
two
it the
connect
Amazon basin. Yeah.
those areas are connected genetically.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have an answer to that question because it's nowhere else. It's just those two areas. So either they were at one point touching each other somehow and people walked the distance, or there were boats. And, you know, Occam's razor, man, boats is so much easier than
Boats. Yeah,
giant land
boats.
masses moving. You know
Well,
what I
and
mean?
let's
And
also take into account that we now know, talking about boats and structure building, we now know
okay.
that Neanderthal had tar and was
Yes.
using tar and other binding methods to attach spearheads. And not long ago, I
Doesn't
watched
take a
a
leap to make boat, man.
well, I was going to say not long ago, I watched a special on experimental archaeology, and they were trying to say, could we do this stuff with Stonehenge at the time that they think they built
Mm-hmm.
it? And they built a boat that they had from that time frame, and they were using things like, hemp and tar and just like peat moss and stuff dried to like fill in the cracks, and
Mm-hmm.
it worked.
Yeah.
So the con and when we think boat, we think giant sailing ship. But there's a
I think Moana, man, those little boats that they
I
have
haven't seen it yet. Yeah,
well,
but
it's Polynesian. It's
the
Polynesian
Polynesian
boats.
style. Yeah, basically the canoes with the outriggers and the small sail, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a
And a
there's a
little
movie
platform.
called it's either called Bully and Nate or Nate and Hayes, depending on which one. It's a Tommy Lee Jones movie that he made in
Okay.
in the early '80s, and it's in the South Pacific, and
Mm,
it's piratey times. But there's a scene where somebody has to leave an island, and they're in one of those little canoe style boats,
right.
and it's amazing to see the way that it's rigged up. And he's going along, and he's going along, and he's going along, and it's just that scene pops into my head because it's one person laid back in the middle of the Pacific on this very small, relatively small boat, just
Hmm.
flying along, praying you don't run into a storm.
Right.
And, with a little bit of wind, those small sailboats, man, they can book.
They'll go. Yeah.
My oldest took sailing lessons, and they would get on these little sunfish things, which are very similar. They don't have an outrigger, but it's one of the smallest single person sailboats, and those things can fly across the water. Um,
Yeah,
so,
especially with a good breeze out on the open
mhm.
ocean, I'm sure you're
Yeah, because
cooking. But that's the thing. I think we've reached the point now. I feel like this being in the royal proceedings of science feels
and the
fairly
Smithsonian,
large. The Smithsonian's
they
reporting on
put
it.
their stamp on it. Yeah,
It's on all the news stations. Like this feels like okay. Can we talk? Does that mean we can start like? Does that mean that we have some precedent now to dig underneath the Native American stuff? Like, does this? Are we
yeah,
going to change if I understand but
and
like
we
the
have the
whole
new law
story's
that
got to change now.
I know, and we're handcuffed here in the Americas with the new law, and I don't know enough about it yet. It was the one passed in the '90s, and again, I do not say this out of any kind of disrespect for the native peoples. I
No.
wish I knew my culture. It got lost because it was not advantageous to be a Native American in the 1900s, in like 1901 or
Hmm.
1902. So my great great grandfather like burned the records and could pass as a white person, so they did, and so that all that heritage is lost. But where do we balance respect of culture with investigating of history? And I think that's a very good question. And they dealt with that in the Egypt special that we just watched on Netflix.
It was called Unknown, the Hidden Lost Pyramid, Hidden Pyramid,
The
something
buried
like that.
pyramid. They're
Buried
hunting
Pyramid, one of
they're
those.
hunting for an early pyramid.
They're in
In
Saqqara, and
Yeah.
so basically what's happened is they had done one. The Netflix did another one. I want to say 2 years ago that was
Hmm.
something like Inside Saqqara or something like
Hmm.
that. That was also spectacularly good. And this was sort of the next season, or maybe it was 2 seasons after, of that same crew. But then they
Hmm.
were also covering Zahi Hawass, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but is sort of the head of, he
He's
is
the
legitimately an
godfather of
amazing archaeologist.
he's the godfather of Egyptian archaeology by
Yes,
Egyptians, and I understand where he's coming from
very
because he was
much.
also talking about. I love the interviews with him because I've only ever seen him like in the Graham Hancock debates and stuff.
Hmm.
And he's like, "Look, as a child, I was disgusted by these foreigners coming in and pillaging our culture and taking it
Yeah,
away." And I was like, okay, so he wants them all to be Egyptian, but then I realized no, he just wants to train respectful archaeologists because
right.
his grad student and assistant is an American from Hopkins
I
University
Yeah.
or something like that. So he's willing to work with other ones, but he's trying to grow homegrown Egyptian archaeologists,
Well, and
which
I
is
also
important. But the point
something
I
that
was
you.
getting to,
Oh.
the point I was getting to is they find a couple of mummies in the special,
Mhm.
and one of them they take out because it's so well preserved they want to look at how it's done. The other one they said there is no scientific knowledge we could get from this one because it has decayed. So we are
Mhm.
going to be respectful of this person's
And they
burial,
closed it back
and they
up, and
reseal it back up. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about, the balance between learn and respect. And
Yeah.
um,
Well,
yeah,
and so to bounce on that, Ben from Uncharted X has works with some folks in Egypt that he's made connections with, and they sort of have talked about on some of the interviews that the guys he works with about sort of the stories that they had as the Egyptian people were very much disregarded by
hmm,
the mostly the British, but there were some
yeah,
Germans and other
Germans
people that
there too,
came, but
Western
there was sort
Europeans.
of, there you go, the Europeans that came in just sort of were like, well, we think that your story isn't, we think it's funny or weird or doesn't, we don't like it, or in this, the
Wrong,
British imperialism
wrong.
is trying to take over, and yeah, whatever. So and so there's a lot of that stuff about like Zep Tepi that just sort of gets disregarded because it isn't in the story that we tell as the European.
And it's not a uniquely Egyptian thing either, because it is
No.
also very much a Western Europe colonial thing.
Hmm.
And part of what I mean by that is they in India they completely dismissed the idea that these cities could have been sunk under the oceans,
Yeah.
and to the point where some of the Indian people were like, "Yeah, that's probably just a legend and it isn't real." And now they've found them. You
I can't remember.
know,
There's a name for it, and I can't remember what
um,
it is now. But yeah, well, there is so there is feels like there's so much evidence. No, at no point do I think we know the answer now. There's not enough evidence to know what happened,
Dwarka,
but I feel, what's that?
Dwarka.
It's not the name I'm thinking of. There's
Okay,
another one.
okay, fair
Another
enough.
lost land that's got a different name than
Yeah.
I was thinking of. But I think what I mean is we're reaching the point now where I feel like we've got at least enough evidence to go, all right, can we at least talk about this now? Like, you have to be willing to concede at some level that we don't know what happened and we need to really talk about this again.
Yeah, here's how I look at it. It's like, all right, we all need to circle up and say it's time to recalibrate. Okay,
Yes.
it's time to recalibrate because it also doesn't dismiss any of the newer research of the most recent time. because we don't know if
Right.
these people died off. We don't know if these people went extinct. We don't know. I mean, so, and you and I were talking about this yesterday before we went and saw the comedy show. I was not expecting a highly philosophical discussion, but we got into one. And there's a lot of these types of discussions that feel like the sides want to be binary. It's
Yes.
one way or the other. And I think there's a lot of gray. And I don't mean gray we don't know, but there's a lot where it might overlap and interact and
Well,
the answer is
I
not
mean, like I
necessarily
definitely,
A or B. It's
yeah,
it's all of that in between.
I bet, you know, 12,000 years ago during the last time the ice bridge melted enough or formed enough, or I don't remember what it is, that the people migrated across that thing. I
Absolutely.
bet that they did.
Yeah,
But that doesn't discount the fact that people had migrated over it the last four times that had happened, potentially,
absolutely.
or had taken a boat. I mean, because that's really the big thing that I think it's always been is at least what I remember was, well, obviously they didn't have boats. So therefore, the only way they could have gotten there is over this land bridge because this land bridge was impassable up until 12,000 years ago. That
And
must be the day they came over
and
because we know people aren't 30 and 40 and 50,000 years. You know what I
and
mean? Like,
and it doesn't mean that something catastrophic didn't happen because I was remembering something, so I just looked it up. It's like we have the Clovis people, which is a type of people and a genetic history that we have through some of the research around a particular type of tool, and and they're saying that they found them down into South America as well, but then they vanished 9,000 years ago and were replaced by a people with a different genetic ancestry. So, does that mean they were wiped out? Does that mean there was a calamity? Does that mean that there was a little minor asteroid impact? Did climate change kill them? Because let's be honest. Right now, this summer in Texas, if we didn't have AC, the death rate would be high.
yeah,
And we're seeing that across the U.S. because the U.S. is facing this like global heat bloom bubble dome thing. And we're
yeah,
seeing people drop dead. I mean, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but there was a U.S. postal worker, mail carrier, that just fell over dead of heat stroke in
yeah.
like the Midwest somewhere. And it's why the people in UPS are striking, going, put AC in our trucks
Yeah.
because it's an oven.
It's too hot. Yeah.
And if we didn't have these modern things right now, the young and the old would be, and the dehydrated would be dying in large numbers because the climate is adapting. And so a lot of these people could be right. And I think they're
Yeah.
so worried about being right, they don't want to hold on to, or they don't want to accept new information.
Right. And I think so much of it is I think there's too many questions for most people. I think that's what it is. It's not that we're going, all right, well, here was the old story and here's the new one. We're going,
Mm-hmm.
the old story isn't work and who the hell knows what happened. We're going to have to
Yeah.
figure it out. And I think the that makes it harder for people potentially to let go of the story, when you don't have something to replace it with.
It brings me back to an old adage: is the more we learn, the less we know.
Yeah.
Right? The more data points we get, the more it breaks our assumed paradigm and just leads to more questions.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's not a
Which
bad thing.
leads me back to the question, which is okay, so what now?
What
What's
now?
next?
What's next is we need to start building out the timeline better and being, and I think in a way what's next is what has happened throughout our life with research into hominids,
Yeah.
because when you and I were young, the rule was it was linear.
Yeah, it
There
was
was a
this one was this to
lineage,
this to this.
yeah, and now it
And
looks like
now
a bush.
it's a
With
tree.
a lot of things that sprouted off and died and ended up not
Well,
going anywhere.
and we split from the Neanderthal, and at some point clearly
We came
came
back.
back together,
Yeah.
or maybe we were interspersed the whole time. I don't know.
So maybe archaeology and the studies of specifically the study around when the Americas were populated, can do something similar. And there can be blips, and there can be blips. And we know through some genetic research, or at least the theory is that at one point humans, Homo sapiens, got down to like 3,000 people, right? And then we bounced back from that, if I'm remembering correctly. But there
It's
was
something like that.
so there's no reason to say that in the Americas they didn't do the same thing. And that also doesn't bring into where does the weird what is it, RH blood type, like the R negative, R positive? Do you remember
Nope.
the? Because we have the AB, and but then there's another subtype where we don't know where it comes from. But that's we can do that in another episode. I'll read back up on it. Um,
Yeah, so it was 70,000 years ago.
mm-hmm.
So a long time ago, but well within
The time frame
the
we're
time
talking about.
frame of everything. Humanity's global population dropped down to only a few thousand individuals. One theory claims that there was a supervolcano in Indonesia that brought on an ice age, but
And
they're not sure at this point.
and,
But
and, and you know, the Americas could have been completely and totally populated, and then whatever that event happened, and
Mhm.
literally wiped them all out.
2,000. They think it got down to 2,000 people.
2000, okay. But that doesn't mean that we didn't have people over here who were just wiped off the map, right?
Well, and take into account though that this study is based off essentially no North American data
I understand,
because
yeah.
we're not. No. I'm adding like
Well, and
there could have been a split. The population that they were looking at could have dwindled down to 2,000 people in, I don't know where, I don't remember, some subcontinent, and somewhere else there could have been an entirely separate, different.
and let us not take into account that when it comes to like history by genetics, the United States is guilty of mass genocide, and so are the Europeans for coming over here and bringing disease, wiping out, millions upon tens of millions of people. Um, so there's a lot of data that's been lost, and those
Yeah.
populations are much smaller now, and a lot of them have intermingled with Europeans and people from other places. But
Well, I mean, imagine if that's what that was. The population dropped down to 2,000 because the Neanderthals came through, brought some plague
Mhm.
in, killed everybody. It could have been the same kind of thing, because there's Hancock talks about there was a French monk or something who went down the Amazon rainforest, down the Amazon River, and wrote about all the stuff that he saw, and then nobody could find it, because they killed them all accidentally. They wiped them all out. But like, there was something there. There was something huge there. And how long does it take for something that big to show up? And is it 130,000 years? Like,
Well, and this is something that's always stuck with me. I remember in taking a history class in college, and the history professor says that when Cortez landed in Mexico, the estimated population of what is today Mexico was 25 million people. And then when Cortez was done, after the disease and the war and the conquering, Mexico didn't reach 25 million people until 1950.
yeah,
So it took almost 500 years to repopulate that country.
it's crazy.
Yeah. So there's big gaps in the data. That's really where
Yeah,
I'm getting at. There's big
absolutely.
gaps in the data, and so we need to be willing to come together for any of these studies and say, okay, there's big gaps in the data. Let's plug in what we do respectfully.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
and
also think there needs to be, we need to go back and look at the old data and all the people that got laughed out of
blackballed run out.
science,
Yeah.
and yeah, and go back and go, okay, so what were you saying, and what, okay, so you said you found something that's the Saruti Mastodon thing. Like, you guys are crazy.
Yeah,
130,000 years,
I
but
may be wrong about this, but I'm remembering like a Charlton Heston ABC special on, maybe it was Giants or something. It's something. It was something that he
giants.
did, but
Mm-hmm.
it was something he did that talked about archaeology in some way, shape, or form that Charlton Heston was
Mm-hmm.
the host of.
Yeah, yeah, he did a bunch of those.
I think it's that one. And I remember a woman archaeologist studying somewhere in Mexico and finding
Mm-hmm.
something and dating it, and it dating back, and they expected it to date back like 2,000 years or 3,000 years or 4,000 years or something like that, and it dated back like 25 or 30,000 years, and she was encouraged to not publish the data, and she published the data in the scientific journals, and then her career was over. Like, she had to leave archaeology because she couldn't get a job
Yeah.
because it was so different than all the other accepted data. And then the government came in and shut down the dig site, and they've never let anybody dig there again, right? So, and I know it's very anecdotal, and I may
No,
be,
I was looking to see if I could find something, and I
yeah,
couldn't. I mean, I did find some of the references that were made in that paper. The chicks, I can't pronounce it. The Chihiquate Cave. They found 30,000-year-old tools. It's in Mexico, and
mm-hmm.
then the 23,000-year-old footprints
Yeah,
in New Mexico as well. I mean,
yeah. What did they used to call these? What's the book that I just gave you? The like historical anomalies.
yeah. Oh,
The orange book that I stumbled across that apparently is worth a ton of money compared to what I paid for it.
strange artifacts.
Yeah, strange artifacts.
Yeah, there's a second volume of this that we're gonna have to try to find.
Yeah, the difference is I found that one for $10, and when we found the other one on the internet, it was over $100.
I know. Yeah, we'll have to
So,
keep looking. But I mean, this gets into all sorts of stuff about like hinges and structures and
but all I meant was like
look, dolmens. Yeah, there's
anomalous
and
artifacts and stuff.
this is probably what we should go start with. This book, he refers to it as the tailings of science.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who compiled that, all the stuff that just sort of gets left by the wayside when they
Because it
they
doesn't
go through
fit.
things. It doesn't
It
fit.
does fit.
And so I think we've reached the point now where there's enough things that don't fit that have actual science behind them
Yeah,
that support
I
that
was
I
just,
think.
I was just thinking science should not be like a IKEA or IKEA furniture or Chinese toy that says some assembly required that you end up with like 8 extra parts left over. Science shouldn't throw away the 8 extra parts. I mean, it should be trying to
Right.
figure out how those 8 extra parts fit into it because unless the Stone Age people or Copper Age people were making extra parts, and and that happens too. And what I mean by that is we have found, my family specifically, walking around Central Texas, have found like failed attempts to make an arrowhead or a spearhead
Yeah.
point where someone's doing the flint knapping and they hit it just wrong and it breaks and now it's useless. So they just toss it off to the side. So you do end up with that detritus as
Yeah,
you're
and
making those.
sometimes the things that happen, you look at and you go, okay, well that doesn't make sense, but we'll just set it aside. But there's
Mm-hmm.
other things that you look at and you go, well, that doesn't make sense, but it also disproves something else. So that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to disregard. I set aside the. I've showed you the giant slab of glass, right? The
I think so.
the Bel Sharim, like it's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
gigantic. like, giant thick sheet of glass. They're like, well, they made, this is like, it's like the big piece. You would like break it up into little pieces, and then you'd heat that stuff up to make like a glass piece. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
industrial process. You make a big sheet of this,
To
and then you
then
break it
blow
up, and
out and roll the other
and then
glass.
you would
Yeah.
take the chunks of that, little pieces of it, and that's what you would then use. This is like the first stage. And so they're just like, well, this was how they did it. And you're going, and they do the math on it. They're like, yeah, but it would take so much wood and so much time, and like it's so inefficient to make one this big with the method that they were using, that we think they were using. And so you have to sort of like, all right, well, clearly they were, you have to sort of set it aside and just go like, we don't have a date for it. Who knows how old it is? Like, we just have to leave it, and maybe some point we'll find an answer for it. But when you find giant sloth bones,
Mm-hmm.
and they've got beautiful holes cut through the middle of them, they've clearly been worked, and they've got a date. You can't set that aside.
And I'm going to bring up another known fact in American history and archaeology, right? We know that Native Americans before Columbus didn't use metal, right? There was no metal working done, except for the fact that there are thousands of copper mining pits that have been found along the shores of Lake Superior and on Royal Island, and they date it back as far back as 8,000 years ago. And the copper was mined and then made into objects such as heavy spear points and tools of all kinds. So metalworking was developing on its own. Now, I have theories around this in Native Americas, but I think this may have been an offshoot of. No, this predate. Never mind. My theory's stupid. Because of the timing doesn't work out. But and copper's easy. To be fair, copper's easy to manipulate. You don't need much heat, right? You can do it in a campfire.
Right.
Do it in a campfire. But the development of copper is huge. Now, it didn't spread. Didn't spread across the Americas. We weren't finding copper-armed natives throughout most of the Americas. It was mostly stone. And, I think there's some reasons behind that. And we can go back to Otzi the Iceman, right?
Yep.
He had a copper axe head.
Yeah.
However, his day-to-day tools, his arrowheads, his knives were all stone.
Right.
Because the stone stays sharp. You don't have to sharpen the stone. Or you don't have to sharpen the stone as often. And as someone who is an avid outdoorsman, I have hunted, I have fished my whole life, done a lot of bushcrafty camping type things. One of the things that we spend a huge amount of time doing is sharpening our cutting tools, right? Because there's nothing more dangerous than a dull knife or a dull axe. So, yes, the metal is more advanced, but is it better?
Well, you'd also have to think that you have different tools for different tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And, a copper axe is great for defending yourself against a person, it may perhaps, or cutting something down that you need to.
And maybe,
but you still.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But you don't want to.
You
may have limited copper, and so you don't want to put copper on your arrows that you might not get back. Like if you shoot it into an animal and it takes off.
Exactly.
You've lost your arrow, so you got more rocks.
Yeah, and it's easy, and it was easier to find the flint. It was literally just laying around. But maybe the heavy copper spearheads were what they used to kill the mastodons. Who
knows?
Or a to defend against a bear. Or something like that, it was.
But
or it was the best hunter got it.
Yeah.
Right, because there's a tradition of that throughout human history, that the best person gets the best tool.
That's true. I think we've reached. So one of the big things I hear Graham Hancock sort of complain about, I guess would be not really complain, but
critique.
Sort of
he critiques
critique
about
is that when the research that we're doing, the archaeology that's being done, is very arbitrary. It's sort of done as developments, and we're building things and that sort of stuff, and which is totally fair. I mean, we should be doing that. But I think we've reached the point, and I think the technology, as far as computers go, has reached the point that I think we need to start crowdfunding archaeology research. Like you need to find some archaeologist who's got some harebrained idea about why he thinks there's going to be something in this particular location,
or just
and
can't
he
get the
needs
funding. He just can't get the
well,
grant for
so
whatever
he needs
reason.
what? $20,000? I mean, we Critical Role raised $11 million from 66,000 people. You can't tell me that there aren't 50,000 people in the United States of America who aren't willing to throw $100 at some guy who wants to go dig something up because he thinks he's, I mean, like there's got to be a way to do this. That we can't
Yeah.
or we need to get somebody like Elon, or but he's so controversial. Somebody with a bunch of
Yeah, but
money. Get
like you said,
Ryan
50.
Reynolds, who just bought himself a soccer team. Like, let's get
Yeah.
somebody famous who's got an investment
Well,
in
and
this.
I like more what you said in the beginning, because if one person is funding it, we then have the potential for an agenda and bias to come in. And here's all I meant by that. Here's all I mean by this. I like the crowdfunding idea better because 50,000 people throwing $100 at something is $5 million. And my
Exactly.
understanding is $5 million is a lot of archaeology.
It's a lot.
You
So
know,
reduce it. So you could, I mean, so just say everybody's $25. Then it's even less. It's still it's still got to be $1 million at least, or one and a half.
1.25.
One and a quarter. So
Yeah,
again, that's a ton of money to do. You could do multiple research things with that. So,
yeah.
it feels like a missed opportunity. One of those things I keep thinking,
We should
like,
be crowdfunding things other than video games and Critical Role and that. We should still be doing that.
yeah.
But
And
crowdfunding
obviously
science is
things are tight for people in the economy. It's tight
absolutely.
for all of us, but at the same time, like,
Dude, if we could get 50,000 people to give $1, that's
$50,000 would be a
50 grand.
lot. That would be a lot of money for some. So yeah, that may be the thing. Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to find some
And
archaeologist who wants to do
it,
a project, and
yeah, contact us. We'll figure out the tech
yeah,
end of it, of how we figure out this crowdfunding thing. I want to talk to the Galt site people more.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like,
You
do they
know,
need money to further do research? Do they need money, or like how like
and I was
maybe that's
reading
what we should
something.
do?
I was reading something interesting, and with the Galt site thing, and it was an interview, and I don't remember if it was the head who's leaving or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but he said, he's like, look, I've got something like 500,000 artifacts and 9 full-time staff. It's taking me forever to get through all this stuff. So it's not even necessarily the digging out of the
It's
stuff.
the staff.
It's the
It's the people.
it's the processing of the things that they've found and the number of trained people to do it,
Yeah.
right?
So I mean, that's what the thing. You got to set up some. Like, I know they have the Galt site has a way that you can donate to
Yes,
them.
they do.
So that you can.
But their PR department sucks. And I don't mean that
Yeah.
as an insult. I mean, like,
No, I
we
know.
accidentally stumbled across it because it's just a little website, and it
Yeah,
is
but it's
groundbreaking,
and it's around the corner from
earth-shattering,
us.
paradigm shifting data in the world of the peopling of America. And it's not splashed all over National Geographic and the Smithsonian, and no one's done a special on it. And I don't know how to make a documentary. I know it takes time, money, energy, and effort, and I don't have the skill set for it. But if you're listening to us and you are a documentary filmmaker or an aspiring documentary filmmaker, contact us.
Yeah,
And
let's do something.
we're working to get in contact with people from the Galt site. I would love to be part of even getting that started. and let people know that this thing exists. Graham Hancock, if you're listening, have you looked at the Galt site? Have you
I'm
talked about
sure
it?
he
Because
has. He has.
has he? Okay, okay.
He and I remember the last time. Maybe it was just Randall, but I remember when one of them, and either Randall, because he was like, "We were just up at the thing up north," and I think that's how I figured out it was
Is that how
there,
you
because
figured it
he
was
just
there?
sort
It
of like mentioned it, and I was like,
was
"Wait a
probably an
minute,
ancient
they're in."
apocalypse research or something. Yeah,
It was. I was like, "Wait, he's talking. He's in Austin. What do you mean up around the corner?" And I was like, looked it up, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, look, there it
that
is."
must be how we found it.
Yeah. So.
Um, but this is not aliens came down from the other planet and did this. This is not an
Mm-mm.
advanced human time frame with computers and stuff. And I also think that's another thing we need to address. When we say advanced civilization, everybody I think
I
immediately
what I
thinks
mean
like
is not hunter gatherers. That's what I mean. I mean not hunter gatherers. I mean villages work.
well, I think we
I
need to
mean
take it a step further. You can have a hunter gatherer based civilization that is still advanced. And
yes, that's fair.
I'm going to refer specifically to the group of tribes that helped influence like how we had our constitution. They met regularly in the northeast. What were they called in the northeast? Like what was the name of the tribes? The
Do you know what letter it starts with? Up north?
they were in the northeast. No, not India. Uh,
It doesn't
I
matter.
I know this. There was a group of um, there was a group of tribes that had treaties and peace treaties worked out. And yes, they did roam some. They did have some hunter gathering, but they also had some agriculture that they did. And they hadn't built stone walls, right? There wasn't a lot of stone structure. There was a lot of stuff. A lot of the northeastern tribes is what I'm getting at. There was a
Yeah.
lot of politics, intercommunication, but we still think of them as a primitive culture. And I'm like, they had everything that's not primitive. I mean, they were
Right.
advanced. Some of their theories on a constitution type documents that they had put together, some of the peace treaties, some of the interaction and the politics were as advanced as what the Greeks were doing.
Yeah.
So now, if they choose to live a hunter gatherer lifestyle, but they're still that advanced, there's nothing wrong with that because I've also seen evidence in the study of some of the hunter gathering tribes in Africa that they have more leisure hours per day per calorie intake than
Yeah.
anyone who lives in the Western world.
Yeah. They work about
Because
3 to 4 hours a day in the
they,
morning, and
and
that's usually it.
then they chill for the
Yeah.
rest of the day.
Unless they like take down a big animal and then the day
Yeah.
is spent butchering the animal and stuff like that. But yeah.
There are times they have more time expenditure. The
Yes.
average daily life is not. They're not putting 60 hours a week into the
Mm-mm.
grind to pay their bills, um and if you want to know what I'm talking about, go watch the film The Gods Must Be Crazy. It is one of the best movies ever made. Um, and shows how things can change and influence stuff. And it's just a great, great film. But we've got to redefine in our minds what advanced society means,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And so that's where we are. So we're gonna wrap it on like what do we do next?